Every age has its own surveillance technologies, its own ways of peering into the gloom. Times change though, and techniques need updating. These radio dishes were taken down in the 1980s and left to rust in a Lincolnshire field. These are their successors. Nowadays, most communication is online. There is a vast amount of information, and it's collected and analysed at stations like this in GCHQ Bude in Cornwall. Surveillance laws haven't kept up with technology. The Home Secretary has introduced the Investigatory Powers Bill, or, if you prefer, the Snoopers Charter, to bring a mess of existing surveillance powers into one comprehensive piece of legislation.
Today we are setting out a modern legal framework which brings together current powers in a clear and comprehensible way. A new bill that provides some of the strongest protections and safeguards anywhere in the democratic world, and an approach that sets new standards for openness, transparency and oversight. This new legislation will underpin the work of law enforcement and the security and intelligence agencies for years to come. It is their licence to operate, with the democratic approval of Parliament, to protect our national security and the public's safety.
The government has also added one major new power, the requirement for every person's internet browsing history to be recorded for a year. Other controversial points included who should sign off surveillance warrants, judges or politicians, the powers of GCHQ, and the question of encryption. But the central dilemma is this: how much power should security services and police forces have to look at our most private communications?
If in the future we have a situation where the security services are able to stop terrorist attacks in the UK, then that's a good thing. No one wants to be followed around, no one wants to have their communications intercepted. But this is actually about stopping serious criminals.
Indiscriminate mass surveillance is a real concern. It's a violation of people's right to privacy. It has massive repercussions for other rights of association and of assembly. And this new bill has the potential of continuing mass indiscriminate surveillance.
Practically every form of communication in British history has been subject to surveillance, from letters to the internet. Mary, Queen of Scots, was executed after a coded letter she sent detailing a plot to assassinate Queen Elizabeth I was intercepted and decoded. The telegraph, when it was invented, quickly became subject to surveillance by the British government. When telephones were invented, they were tapped. All of these intrusive powers required a warrant.
In the late 19th century, people were listening through walls with glasses stuck to the walls, and often in hotel rooms you had a double suite, so a spy could hire the room next with a flimsy wall in between. Then by the First World War, they had dictaphones which they could stick behind curtains and record conversations. By the 1950s, you had rooms, huge big rooms full of computers doing the encryption and decryption. Surveillance is here to stay, that's for sure. We've lost our privacy. It will never return. So what we do need to do is to ensure that it doesn't get out of hand.
Originally, these 4 huge dishes were mounted on high, facing out east over the sea, looking for a known enemy using known tactics and known technologies. But today, the reality is a lot messier, and that's the reality the bill addresses.
We don't listen to conversations, and if you could hear the snatches that we do, you'd understand why.
The problem isn't so much that legislation is slower, but that technology is moving much faster. It took the telephone 75 years to reach 50 million users. It took the internet 4 years. And the internet we had pre-2000 was pretty basic. HelloGoogle.com. Now there are 1 billion smartphones in the world. Facebook has 1.5 billion users. That incessant online activity is a potential goldmine for intelligence services, but it's also a danger. Today's young adults have grown up in the digital age, and they spend more of their lives online. We asked 3 what they thought of the new bill.
We are on our phones 24/7. I'm on my WhatsApp, I'm on my Twitter, so it's a situation where it's like, I do not want to have my information out there, especially conversations, private conversations where these laws are going to have access to. I don't think that's right.
This is essentially a blanket surveillance operation. There is no sort of target in this per se. It's everyone's data and everyone's metadata, regardless of who they are and whether they've lived a perfectly innocent life for the past few years.
You need to have a relationship where liberty and security are able to be compatible, and this takes away liberty and makes security the big brother, in a sense.
People's messages have been divided into two types for the purposes of the security services. There's communications data and there's content. If I send a text message, the authorities can see what time I sent that message, where I was, and that I sent it to you. That's done through communications data, also known as metadata, and doesn't require a warrant. But the content of that message, what I write to you, can't be accessed without a warrant. The same goes for accessing websites and opening apps on our phone. Authorities will be able to tell which sites I've looked at, which apps I've used, all without a warrant. They can't tell what I wrote in that message though, whether that's a text, an email, or a Facebook message.
To teach them a lesson that we'll never forget.
Security services and police say that communications data has been vital in foiling terror plots, such as the 2006 plan to bring down transatlantic airliners with liquid bombs.
I guarantee that surveillance has been used in all the prevention of all the 6 attacks I think the Home Secretary and the head of the security services has said. I guarantee that using technical surveillance will have been involved in those. There's no detail, obviously. But of course, we have to face the fact that the world has moved on and we need to have laws that allow the security services to protect us.
It's also useful in serious domestic crime. 95% of all criminal prosecutions rely on communications data. That figure includes the prosecution of Ian Watkins, the former Lost Prophet singer, found guilty of sexually abusing babies. There was no physical evidence nor witnesses at the start of the investigation. Communications data gave the lead. The prosecution eventually relied heavily on phone contacts and text messages. The other argument is that the distinction between communications data and content doesn't make much sense in a truly digital age. Given how often we use our smartphones and how much information they record, the who, where and when can be just as revealing as the what, in a way that a letter or a phone call just isn't. We live our lives online. Your browsing history is a record of your life, and under the new laws, that record is open to police and security services.
It is an additional kind of intrusion, I suppose, into people's private lives, and one that Parliament needs to think very carefully about in terms of, A, whether it's really necessary, and then secondly, whether it's proportionate. But it's really the job of Parliament to come to that determination.
Edward Snowden first revealed the scale of internet monitoring by security services in 2013. His leaked documents set in train a number of independent reviews of UK surveillance, which the Investigatory Powers Bill draws on. This is where that monitoring happens, at the Donut, GCHQ's headquarters in Cheltenham. Billions of data points are analysed each day. GCHQ's ability to collect bulk intelligence is governed by a warrant. Under the new bill, the warrant must be focused on people outside the UK. However, the whole point of bulk interception is that it devours the records of millions of people without regard for their nationality. UK citizens' data will still be scooped up. One thing is sure, there is no doubt that state surveillance has exceeded its power several times.
The fact that it's been confirmed that our communications were intercepted, they were held, they were stored, that's a matter of huge concern. The bigger concern is that we have absolutely no idea what was stored, what was intercepted by the government, what did they do with it, who did they send it to, and are they still doing it?
The question of warrants is also key to the new bill in another respect. Previously, when MI6 or any of the other services wanted to access the content of the communication, they'd ask for a warrant, and that was signed off by the Home or Foreign Secretaries in Parliament. Under the new plans, though, those warrants will now also have to be signed off at the Royal Courts of Justice by a judge. The Home Secretary described it as a double-lock system.
The judges have a role to play, but that role should be to verify and to check what has been done by ministers. And it is absolutely essential that if judges are to be involved, they should be trained and given a full understanding of the national security issues they're dealing with, because that is actually not the natural territory of judges.
Even with a warrant, though, there's another problem with getting at the content of a message. Remember how it took the internet 4 years to reach 50 million people? Well, it took WhatsApp and Instagram less than 2 years. These services have superseded text messages and emails, and they're tricky for the UK government to access. First, US companies like Facebook and Apple are not subject to UK law, and they work with the UK government on a voluntary basis. Second, some of those companies keep messages encrypted to keep them safe, so that even they are unable to unscramble them. A spate of hacks, most notably TalkTalk, has only highlighted the need to protect people online. The UK government already had the legal power to ask companies to hand over so-called content in the clear, unencrypted communications. That power has never been tested, but it has been retained in the bill, even though the Home Secretary said the bill does not ban encryption. Sky News understands that technology companies would fight this power if it were used.
This bill isn't just about bringing laws up to date with modern technology. For decades, police and security services have worked shrouded in secrecy. But paradoxically, as the threat has become more unpredictable, more unknowable, security services and police admit they have to be more open about how they work. This bill needs to deliver transparency, accountability, and oversight.
Some will frame this as an old-fashioned, two-sided debate, security versus liberty. But with so many valid and competing claims, it's much less clear and much more complex than that. Tom Cheshire, Sky News.